All right, guys, so we're going to continue our to-do app project that we started a couple days ago. Today, our main focus is to add authentication. This is basically giving our users the ability to log in and get data that is relevant to them. So there's going to be some settings we need to modify, some added data structures we need to add to the back end, and some modifications to the front end. So we have a UI to actually log in, sign up, all those items, and also one small change to the way we make calls to our API. So a few items to get through. We're going to walk through it together. So let's get started with that. So I'm going to go to my React projects and make sure we're in a good state here. All right, so I'm going to launch this. So I have my debugger project, I think should do it. All right, so we're going to let that launch. But again, this is where we left off mostly on Wednesday. I did add a little bit of styling. I changed a few items on the React side just to organize the code a little better, but this should be familiar to what we left off with on Wednesday.
Hey, Ankur, that launch all thing you just did, is that just basically saying run server on your Django and then the npm start as well?
Yeah, so there's 3 configurations. I know this was probably a confusing thing that I dropped in on Wednesday, but you can add individual configurations to launch your Python, your Django server, your React server, and then also the browser that connects your app. So the launch all is just a combination of launching all those together. So now my debugger can debug all parts of my project. If you're confused by that, if anyone's confused by that, we can walk through it together. It is a useful thing to be able to debug your entire project. I find it useful, especially when there's some weird errors. I want to actually investigate my code, but we can walk through that together at a later point. All right, so my project should be running. This is what my project looks like. We have our to-do list. So these are the 3 to-do lists we created on Wednesday. I added some styling, nothing too crazy going on. But our goal today is to add the ability to allow users to sign up, log in, log out, and also see data that is relevant to them once they log in. Additionally, for this project, I'm going to say we want to prevent anonymous users, meaning I'm not logged in right now. If I'm not logged in, I should not be able to see or access the site because this is private information, people's private to-do list. If I'm just a random user that hits the site, we should prevent an anonymous user who's never logged in from seeing content on the site. Right. So
hey, Ankur, can I just ask you really quick? I know for when we did a Django version, we had it so that anonymous users could also start lists. Is that how you're going to do it? Or are you going to do it like fully? You have to log in to use it.
I'm going to do it where you have to log in. I will talk about if we don't want that. There's just a switch we need to change on the backend side. So we'll talk about our options, and again, whatever you guys want to do, you should have control over that. But okay, let's get at it. This is where we left off. Let's go through the setup on the back end. So these are just some settings we need to apply in order to get some functionality from our back end. So I'm going to go to our code, focus on our Python Django project first. So let me close all these files. Okay, so starting with an empty slate here, we're going to go to our back end, and the first thing we'll modify is our project settings. All right, so we're going to add a few more configuration options. These are just things that are required. Obviously, documentation will kind of clue us into this, but I'll let you know what we're going to do. So we should have installed CORS headers. That was a library that we installed. So Django CORS headers that should be installed. We need to add the app name to the installed apps. We also wanted to add the CORS middleware that was done previously. We also added the CORS allowed origins, which told Django that our front end is allowed to make API requests or API calls to the back end here. So all of this was done beforehand, these 3 items, but we want to add a couple more configuration options for our needs today. So I'm just going to copy and paste them, and we'll talk about when we need these items. All right, so there's 3 sections I added, and this came from the curriculum page, but I'll talk about them one by one. So we need to add CSRF trusted origins, and that's going to be kind of duplicate of our CORS allowed origins. This is specifically needed if we have a separate project setup. So again, if our React is not being served up by our backend, we need to tell our backend, who can we trust in regards to with the CSRF token. All right, so that's one configuration option. It's part of CORS headers. So you guys can read more about this section if you want, but just know that we need to specify who's allowed to, who do you trust with our CSRF tokens. The second option, just another required item, CORS allow credentials. We need to set that equal to true. The default is false. So let's make sure we add that. Again, all of this is coming from the curriculum page. So if you can't type it or need to reference it, it should be there. The last item is not required for having login and logout functionality, but it will be beneficial that Django REST framework is going to manage the permissioning for us. So this is a REST framework feature, not a CORS header feature. What we're specifying here, and this is configurable, so we're specifying how we're going to authenticate users. There are different methods of authentication. We've talked about session-based authentication, so that's what we're going to go with here. There's also basic authentication, which means you just simply had to provide a username and password every time you want to make a request to the backend. Obviously, that's not very user-friendly. There's also token-based authentication. I know that's something we did in the past. If you watch, past lecture videos, we worked with JSON web tokens. I'll be honest, it's pretty similar to what we're doing with CSRF tokens, where we have a value that we pass to the front end, and the front end just needs to send that along with any request to prove that the front end is logged in and they are who they say they are. All right, so this first section in our Django REST framework is specifying how we're going to deal with authentication. The second part is the default method that we want. So this specifies how REST framework will handle the view sets and how the permissions will automatically be defaulted to. So I've chosen an option of is authenticated. This is one of many permission schemes you could set as the default. So is authenticated here means you must be logged in to get access to our data. Again, that is not the only option. If I do a quick search for Django REST framework authentication types or permission types, there's allow any, which means anyone can get access to your data. So that would be the case if you want anonymous users to have access to your data. Let me find this page. That's where it exists. Okay, so API reference. These are all the permissioning schemes you can set as the default. Now you can override these as you wish, but if you set allow any, that means anyone that comes to your site has CRUD access to your resources, assuming you expose the URLs. So if you have get all task lists, allow any would say anyone, anonymous user or logged in user, can get access to that data. Authenticated means you must be logged in to get CRUD access to certain data. You can go through some of these other ones. Admin user, kind of self-explanatory. If you have admin permissions, that will only grant you access to certain parts of our data access. There's a few more in here. Again, you guys can read through this, but I'm going to go with is authenticated, which means anonymous users have to log in to get access to our data. They will get a 403 message, meaning unauthorized. They don't have access to our data if they don't prove that they are logged in with our system. Okay, so those are the items. I want to make sure I didn't miss any hand raised. I think I saw some hand raised. Andrew?
Yeah, I had one. So even before we did authentication, we needed the CORS anyways, because the front end was talking to the back end even before authentication, right?
Correct.
But now that we're doing authentication, the only thing you really added for today was it the trusted origins and allowed credentials?
Yeah, these two things are just something you need. This is something that took me a lot of time to figure out because getting the front end to send the exact data to the back end was a bit of a chore. So these are just settings that you need to set, assuming that you have a separate project setup. So this might be one benefit of the hybrid solution. You don't need to worry about these configurations because it's all one origin. So everything kind of just works with Django. But in this case, since we have a React separate from our backend, we need these two items. If you have a hybrid setup, you can ignore these and it should work fine. You still do probably want this regardless if you have a hybrid setup or a separate project setup, because this is just going to handle the permissioning automatically. It's DRF being DRF, meaning it's doing the hard work for us.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, Phil?
Yeah, for the is authenticated for the permission classes, do you know what the default is if you don't specify that? Is it the allow any or?
Yep. Yeah. So if you don't specify what default you want, allow any is the default that it goes with. So yeah, if you leave this off, then anonymous users will have free access to carding operations on your backend API, assuming they have the URLs for them. All right. So these are the 3 settings we need to add to settings.py. Again, not too much to know other than you just have to add these. Again, if you want to look more into different permissioning schemes or authentication schemes, you can read documentation. But let's move on from here. So now that we got this in place, we want to add some user related items to our models and every other piece of our backend. So let's go to our models and start from there. That's usually where I like to begin. We want to incorporate some association with user logins here. Right now, task list and task are kind of just, random data that doesn't tie into any user accounts. But to do this, I'm going to use a built-in model to make this a lot simpler for us. So Django.contrib.auth.models. And it's sometimes a challenge to just find what you're looking for in the Django importing. But here I'm going to import a model. This is the built-in user model that Django uses by default. Now I know Raphael has showed us a way to kind of extend that, as in if we want to add our own fields, customize it, that is possible. There's actually like 3 or 4 different ways we can customize the user model. But if I go to admin panel, so if I go to, what is it? Localhost 8000 admin. I think I have a super user created, and I do. All right, so this users group that you see in the admin panel, this is the user model that Django is using. So if I go to, I guess I have 2 users here. We have username and password. These are all the fields I have access through off that user model. So first name, last name, email addresses. This is on the built-in user model that we can use. Now, normally we usually just need username and password, right? That's how users will log in. All this other stuff is extra. We don't usually need extra stuff on top of that. But if we did need to, again, it is possible to extend the user model or provide your own custom user model to Django. But for today's case, I'm just going to use the user model as is. Again, we can spy in and see what the code is. It's pretty simple. I guess it comes from abstract user, but it has the fields that we want. So it has username, it has password somewhere down here. But yeah, so I'm not going to create my own user model. I'm just using what Django has applied, and it's going to be enough to get this off the ground. Was there a hand raised?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, for the default model, are there validations attached to it? Because I know when we changed it before, like the emails weren't validated and we had to add that in manually. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, the validation should be there. Again, we can look at, I think we just saw it actually. If I go to abstract user, there's a user name validator. So they have to be unique. There's probably restrictions. There's going to be restrictions for email, for password. I know when I try to, if you try to add a really simple password through the admin panel, it actually yells at you. So if we try to create a new user here, let's do add user. I'm gonna go with Friday user. If I try to add a simple password of password, it'll actually yell at me. Password, save. Notice password's too common. I'm pretty sure that's being done on the back end. That's not being done by this form, but I might need to check into that. But yes, there are built-in validations to answer that question. Okay, I don't need to create a new user right now. So yeah.
I was going to point out that password validations happens in settings.py. I know that just because I disable it when I'm developing, just to make it easy to set like Bob as a password.
Gotcha. All right, so we know Phil's passwords now, if you guys want to hack him. So we have the built-in user model. Now we need to associate it with some or all of our models. So what I'm going to do is add a new field and call it creator. So the person that creates a task list will get their account associated with the task list model. So this new field will be called creator. I'm going to make that a foreign key relationship. Again, we've gone through this many times before, but foreign key means one to many, meaning one user can create many different task lists, but one task list cannot be associated with more than one user. So that's why I'm putting a foreign key here. We're going to point to the user model that we imported, do our usual business of on delete. What do you want to happen? So if the user gets deleted from our database, we probably want to delete all their associated task lists. So I'll use Cascade for that. I don't know what happened here. And then I want a related name, as always, optional but highly recommended. So how will the user model refer to this relationship? And I'm going to call it lists. So simply lists. So that'll be how I could refer to it. Okay, so that's the only change we need to make to our models. We could add a user to our task model also, but I'm thinking, again, tasks are going to be associated with task lists. So I can get the kind of the creator or the owner of those tasks by looking at the parent task list. So it's a design decision. You guys, you totally could put in a user model reference into your task, but I'm going to think it's redundant from my standpoint. All right, so that's all we need to do for our models. As always, if you make any changes to our models, we need to make migrations. So let's do cd backend. I need to do Python manage.py. We probably need a default here, so I'm going to do that right off the bat. They'll probably yell at me. So default will be, I guess we can make nullable. So null equals true, and default will be null. All right, I'm doing this because when I make migrations, it's going to ask me to fill in that field. So I'm going to say our existing task list will not be attributed to anyone. So Python manage.py, make migrations. That is VS Code being problematic. Okay, so we did add a field to the creator task list. Again, we do not need to create the user model. That's already been created when we do our initial migrations. That's one of the many things that Django automatically adds to our database. So this is the modification we made. That seems legit. Now we want to migrate our changes. So Python manage.py migrate. All right, we've done this many times before, so don't need to spend extra time on it. So models are done. That's checked off. Next up, I'm going to go to serializers. So in serializers, we have our task list serializer, and we also have our task serializer. I'm going to add another serializer and call it user serializer. And as you guys can imagine, this is going to serialize our user information should we need it. So model serializer. Same design as always. I'm going to copy and paste to save some time. So we have our inner class meta. Again, must be named meta. That is not a naming choice that I picked. That is a Djangoism. Our model is going to be user. And the fields we want to expose, I'm just going to limit it to the username and the password. There are extra fields on the user model, but these are only 3 I care about today. So I'm just going to specify those are the fields I care for this serializer to use. But there are some additional considerations we need to make here. For one, we should almost never transmit the password to the front end. There's no real case. We need to send the password to the front end. The password should be handled in the back end, regardless of if we need to update our password. The back end should do it. It's a higher risk if we're sending a password, even if it's hashed, to the front end. That's not going to be a good safety measure. So in this case, I'm going to say our password field, password is going to be a serializer field, which is a char field. Keep in mind, it's already going to default to char field. I know we didn't really talk about it, but serializers will take your model and create appropriate serializer fields that kind of reflect what the model fields are. There's usually a one-to-one mapping, meaning I had char field in my model for password. That's going to be a serializer char field. But in this case, the extra thing I want to do is write only. Write only, which is the opposite of read only. Write only. This means that we can save a password, but we can never retrieve a password for the front end. And that's something that I want just for a security measure. We should never send this out, only accept it for updates or creation. All right, there's one more thing I need to add here. If you remember, when the user submits their password, it's going to be plain text, right? Like if I submit password 1234 as my password, that's going to be coming in as plain text, but our database needs to have a hashed version of it. So this is where we actually need to intercept our serializer. We've not really done this before, but this is an added concept we're going to talk about with serializers. We can rely on the default behavior for most of our serialization. But in this special case, we need to make sure the password gets hashed. This user serializer is not going to automatically know to hash a password. It's kind of a dumb object. It just says, hey, you have some JSON data, you want to convert it to Python data. The serializer can handle that. It doesn't know the specifics about all of these fields. So in this case, password needs to be hashed. So I'm going to intercept the behavior of my serializer, validated data. This is a base method coming from model serializer. We can try to find it. I'm not going to waste time trying to dig into model serializer or its inherited classes, but this method of create, self, and validate data, this is a method that exists in one of the base classes of model serializer or in model serializer. I'm just saying I want to get first dibs at handling that function call. Again, this is inheritance at play. Great topic to learn about if you're still kind of fuzzy on it. But what I'm going to do here is we're going to get past a validated data object. I'm simply going to add in the item that we want. So for this, I need to import another item from Django. So from Django.contrib.auth.hashers. Again, these are really hard to find sometimes. We need to import a function called make password. This will accept a plain text password and give you the hashed version for Django's purposes. So we're not going to do the hashing ourselves. I think Raphael did the hashing himself when we went over authentication last Friday, which was cool to see. But in this case, I'm just going to let Django do the hard work for me. So make password will do the hashing. So here I'm going to say I want to call make password and just pass the plain text password that the user sent us, hash it, and put it back into our data set. And then I'm just going to call our base class. So super.create validated data. Again, I know inheritance can be complicated, but hopefully you guys are getting more comfortable with it. All I'm saying here is I'm naming this function exactly the same name as something that exists below in this inheritance chain. That way I get first dibs at doing whatever I want with this function. In this case, I'm saying hash the password, and then I'm going to call the base class and say, do what you normally do. I'm not going to recreate the entire wheel or reinvent the entire wheel. I'm going to do the specific I want and let the base class do what it normally would do from that. I saw a hand raised. Andrew Chen.
Yeah, I had a question. Why are we serializing the password in the first place? I mean, it has to be serialized when it goes to the database, but why would we even like want to show a hash password through a serializer?
We're not going to show it. That's the thing. This is write only. So the use case of this serializer, it's kind of seems like overkill, but this is specifically when a user wants to sign up with a new account. They need to create a new user object. So we give them a sign up form saying, hey, what's your username? What's your new password? When we get sent that data, we need to hash their new password to store it into the database. We're never going to send it out though. It's write only. Same thing if they want to update their password, the serializer would handle that, the update a part of CRUD, but we only want to accept the password in one direction. We're never going to put it back to the user. Okay, so that's what this is doing right here. Again, just additional stuff you can do with serializers. So normally we rely on serializers doing all the hard work for us, and that's great. It handles like 95% of the use cases, but we do have the option to customize behavior with whatever's built in to DRF. So keep that in mind. If you run into a special case, you should likely have the option. Again, there are limitations, but you're not just stuck with what DRF does, and that's it. You can override functionality to add on top of it. Shun?
Yeah, when you create a user in Django, I thought it already automatically hashes the password, or am I mistaken?
There is a function, I think it was like create user. What was it? User. I'm going to be kind of fuzzy here, but I think it was create user was a function. Someone can correct me. When you use this function, yeah, that will call the make password for us automatically. The difference here is that the serializer is going to create the object for us. I am not writing, add new user or create user. The serializer is handling all of that for us. So when we get a post request to this the view set, so remember view sets, right? These handle all the CRUD routing. If we get post, put, update, delete, whatever, the view set will know what operation to do. It calls on the serializer to actually perform that operation of creating or updating. So the serializer will do that. So we need to explicitly say, hey, we got a plain text password. We know we need that to be hashed. Oh yeah, we're not explicitly creating the user. So that's why we're just doing part of the work here. Serializer will take care of the rest. Does that make sense? Or
Yes, it makes sense. Thank you.
Again, yeah. Django and Django Rust Framework are doing a lot of the heavy lifting for us. We just got to do the small bit that we need, and then everything else gets done for us. Okay, so that's our user serializer, and we kind of gave away why we need this. It's gonna be for sign up functionality. Again, a bit overkill, but can be used for other purposes. Like, for example, if we had an admin user that needs to delete user accounts from the front end, this serializer would be useful. We're not gonna do that, obviously, but again, serializer is pretty simple to create, so I'm just gonna go with that. All right, so we did models, we did serializers. Next up in our process are views. So I'm gonna create a view set. These are super simple. User view set, model view set, query set equals what's it? User.objects.all. And our serializer class, no surprise, would be user serializer. So again, just to kind of review here, model view set's going to do all the routing. It's going to know what to do based on the HTTP method that it gets. But we need to tell it what data it's going to interact with and how that data needs to be kind of unpackaged and packaged up. So that's what these two items will specify. That's all we need. Again, view sets are really magical. 3 lines of code, and we get so much functionality out of them. All right, so that takes care of our views. The last thing we need to do is our routing. And this is pretty simple also with using default router. Just need to add a new route here. So if I go to users, user view set, and user here. All right, that's it without typos, hopefully. So we did our models, we did our serializers, views, and URLs were pretty much a snap. So now if I actually run my API view just to see it working, let's go to, I think my server should be running. Let's go to localhost 8000/to-do API. So that's my base URL. Looks like my server is not running. I did not recover from that. So let's refresh this. Hopefully I have no errors. All right, looks good now. We go to my API view now. Will it be there? There it is. All right, so notice we have our new routing for users. If I go to to-do_API/users, this is my Django API, Django REST Framework API view. I'm gonna go to users, and there we go. We have 2 users that we see here. We have admin user, which we created a long time ago. I created a new user X some time ago just for testing purposes. But notice what's omitted here. We do not have the password field shown here. The password field exists, but our serializer, we told our serializer that's write only. We should never send it out as part of a GET request. So we have 2 users here. If we want to create a new user, again, this is basically like using the admin panel, but this is sending a post request to our API. So let's say it's going to be Friday user, which I tried to create before. Password needs to be actually secure. So I'm going to make it, I'm surprised this is not actually hidden, but okay, my password's going to be Quebec1234. Let's see if I can post this. That should create a new user in my system. That did not happen. And it's because I forgot my return statement. Silly me. So here I called the base class, but notice I'm not returning what the base class would return. So if I go to, let's just find this method if you guys are up for it. So is it in here? No. Here's that mapping that I told you about. It takes model fields and converts it to serializer fields. So again, there's a lot of one-to-one mapping here. Not always, like a field becomes a model field. Actually, that's probably the same. But let's kind of dig and find this method. Fun little adventure. And look for creates. Oops, don't want to modify the code. Creates. That function exists here. There it is. So this is what the base class is doing with create. It is doing some stuff that I'm not going to bother learning about, but notice it returns a value. This is in the base Django code. It's not code I've written. So the base, one of the base classes has a create method that we overrode. The base class returns something. We still need to return whatever the base class returned. So if I go back to my serializers, notice here my mistake was that I was not returning whatever the base class returning. So in this case, that was accidental, but easy to fix. So we call the base class, it returns something. We need to return it out of this method also. Okay, hopefully that was the only error I have here. So let's go back. Let's try to recreate this user, post. Wait, I already created that user. All right. I think that user got created, but we didn't return it. So let's go with donut user. Same password is fine. Roots. All right. So Friday user did get created. We just had an error after we create the user. Let's create one more. So donut user password will be the same, Quebec 1234. I'm gonna post, and there we go. New user got created, ID 5, username donut user. So this is our proving that our routing and our user view set, user serializer works that we just coded up. All right, so that looks like it's working. I'm not gonna spend too much time testing it because I'm pretty confident we did our things correctly. So let's move on from there. So we have the ability to create a new user. This is our sign up functionality, right? If a new user comes to our website, they actually want to use our tasks or to-do list site, I'm forcing them to log in or to sign up before they get access to the features of my site. So they can now sign up with any user they want, but we also need to create login and logout functionality. So that's where we're going to do next. So we're going to kind of bounce back and go back to views. So we have view sets to handle our CRUDing, but login and logout is not a CRUD operation for our resources. It uses our user model, but it does not read, write, update, whatever the CRUD operations are. So the view set here is not going to be able to handle that kind of natively. We could build in methods here. I'm going to create standalone methods just for my preference. So here I'm going to create a new file just to organize my code. So in my app folder, I'm going to create a new file just for my needs. Again, you don't have to create a new file. I'm going to call it views_auth.py. This is going to be kind of a helper method for my views. And for this, I need to create two methods. If you guys don't mind, I'm just going to copy some code and write the rest. So I need to import a bunch of stuff. I'll try to go slowly here. We need to import JSON, the JSON module from Python. We also want the Csrf Exempt decorator. If you guys remember, this tells Django that for these specific view handlers, a Csrf token is not needed, or Csrf, I should say Csrf. Csrf token is not needed. And that makes sense for like when a user is signing up or when they are, when they're logging in, they're not going to have a token, right? Because they have never logged in before, so they don't have a token that Django has sent them. So that's what Csrf Exempt will do. It'll omit that security check. JSON response, we've worked with that. We're using built-in authentication methods. Again, we've seen this last Friday when we did authentication. So hopefully this isn't too new to us. I just created some helper methods for my purposes to respond in case we did something incorrectly. All right, so the first view handler I'm going to create is going to be Csrf Exempt, meaning we don't need a Csrf token. I'm going to call this handle login. So this is the view handler that will handle a login request. And we're going to write a try and request method. Okay, so we're going to make sure we get a post request, right? Because we're sending data to the server. We're expecting a post. We don't want any other method when they're logging in. We need to extract the data that was sent to us. That's json.loads. Request.body should have what the user sent in terms of password, username, and password. So let's get the username and password out of there. Username equals data.get username. Again, this is going to be a dictionary. We're just getting the values using the key that should be in there. Again, if I miss any hand raised, let me know. I'm seemingly missing them today. So please ask any questions at any point. All right, so we're extracting the data from the dictionary that so we got some JSON, we converted that to Python dictionary. From that Python dictionary, we're getting two values out of there, username and password. Then we need to authenticate the user, meaning we need to verify that this user actually exists and their credentials match. So this authenticate function that we imported, again, this is coming from Django contrib.auth. There's an authenticate function. All we need to do is pass username as a keyword argument, username, and we're going to pass password as a keyword argument. All right, so given that we have accurate credentials, authenticate will verify that by taking a plain text password, hashing it, and matching it with the hash password in the database for the given username. Assuming that
Ankur, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I just see that on the curriculum page, it has the same code that you're writing right now, but instead of if method equals post, it says if method does not equal post. So I'm just trying to clear up which it should be.
That is a typo. Sorry about that. It should be post. We want this to be a post. I think I was doing a different check before. Thanks, Kat, for pointing that out. That's probably going to be confusing for other students. I apologize. That should be a post. So thanks for having my extra eyes there. But yeah, we want this to be a post because when they submit a form, they're sending data. We want to capture it. So this should be a post. Try this, authenticate. Assuming we get a user back, meaning that user is authenticated, we want to log in with that user. So if they have that user, we want to log in. So that's another function we grab from Django. Again, coming from contrib auth. We have a login function. We need to pass them the request objects and the user objects. Assuming that goes well, let's just return something back to our user. So I'll do JSON response. Now this is a design choice. I could definitely easily change this later on, but the only thing I want to send back to the user is a username. There can be an argument made that you might want to send the user ID back to the front end so they can use that for certain purposes. And that's totally valid. I probably will change this at some point if I need that user ID. I'm just going to say username is fine for my purposes. So we let the user know that I don't think we need this data, but I'm just going to put it just in case. We're going to let the user know that they logged in by passing in their username back to them. Okay, if things go awry, we should probably send them some error message. So we'll say accept any exception that occurs. We'll just let the user know about it. So I have my helper function called error on request. Again, this is my function that I made. Just going to pass them along the error or the exception. And then if we didn't get a post, we want to send back a bad request. Return bad request. Again, just to point out, error on request and bad requests are functions I created just to kind of make it a little easier to reuse functionality. Okay, looks like my tabbing is way off. There we go. Okay, so that was the login. Again, just to walk through this, the user sends us, fills out a form with their username and password. We get that as JSON. We convert it to a Python dictionary, capture the username and password out of there, authenticate, meaning we prove that they are actually a legit user using the authenticate method. Assuming they are legit, we proceed to log them into our system, meaning they get a session ID, they get a Csrf token, and that will automatically be handled by Django. I'm not manually passing the Csrf token. And we just send some friendly response telling them, hey, they logged in successfully, status code 200. Okay, so that was the login. Logout is similar. So let's just do that quickly. Csrf Exempt, def logout, handle logout. That's going to take our request objects. It's going to look very similar to logging in. So I'm going to copy this to save some time. But obviously, they're not going to be logging in. They just want to log out. So we're going to expect the post. We don't have any body, so all this stuff can go away. I'm not sure if we need to authenticate them, to be honest. They're not going to send us a password, so I guess we can't authenticate them. We'll just say we want to log them out. So for logout, all we need to do is pass the request object. We have no user object. We need to pass them. The request object should have the user tied to it. We'll see that later on also. Just know that the request object kind of keeps track of who's logged in for us. If no one has logged in, that user, so there's a user attribute on the request object. This will be anonymous user if no one's logged in. If someone has logged in, this user object will reference the actual user record that we had. But for logout, all we need to do is pass the request object. All right, and we're going to return something. We'll just pass the status and say, hey, good job if you logged out. Logged out successfully. Whatever. We can send whatever we want here. The message doesn't matter at all. The status code does matter. So we want to send the 200 here. Okay, so that's our logout. Nothing too exciting going on there. But now that we have these views, we want to obviously create routing to them. So I'm going to go to my URLs. And here I need to create some new routes. Again, we do not have a new view set, so we can't use the default router to kind of do this. This is going to be our old way. Create some manual paths. So I'm going to say, if they go to login, that'd be routed to handle login. And if they want to logout, they'll have to send the API request to todo_API/logout to actually request being logged out. And my view handler for that was handle logout. It didn't like that, did not rename it properly. Handle logout, that should exist.
I think you just don't have the import at the top.
Oh, right. So I'm going to import it through views. So I want to go to views and import this here. I probably could do this import in whatchamacallit URLs, but I'll just do it here. So views path imports everything. Now let's import login, logout. Okay, so now that I've imported it into views, like the views, the importing is kind of transitive. Since views has access to this, if I simply import views here, everything that views imported also gets imported into this file. So I should have access to handle login and logout now. Okay, so that should be done. We got an error down here. Oh, I don't know how this popped in. Save that. Okay, so our server's up and running. We could test this out with our API view if we wanted to. I guess we could try it. Actually, we can't. We don't have the API view to do it. But yeah, we're gonna have to trust that this works or debug it if it does not. Okay, so keep in mind, these do not require Csrf tokens. We said that with Csrf Exempt. But there's one more case that we need to think about before we get to our front end. So if you remember way back when we were messing with our settings, I chose my design as every call to our view sets must be authenticated. That is the default behavior that I want. Now the issue here is, well, what if we are signing up? A signing up user is not going to be authenticated ahead of time. Meaning if I look at my view set right here, all the CRUD operations right now need to be authenticated, as in the user needs to be authenticated to create, read, update, delete with this view set. But the create case is where they're creating a new user account. That doesn't, we should not force them to be authenticated to create a new user account. That wouldn't make much sense. So this is where we can tinker with the default behavior that user view set is doing. Similar to what we did with serializers, right? We had our user serializer, but we had some extra functionality we needed to do. So we added that on. We can do the same thing with our view set. So we need to do something a little special here. So we're going to handle that in our view set right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to spy on which type of method or what type of action the user is trying to do. So for this, I'm going to say get permissions. This is another function that exists in our model view set. So again, inheritance at play over and over again. Get permissions is a function I am not magically making up. It's a function that exists and I'm overriding it to do what I want to do here. So I'm going to think about what should my CRUD operations be for a user. Now, we talked about if we have self.request, again, this is built into our serializer, we have access to the request.method. If this is a post, we know that they're trying to create a new user, which means I'm going to say return a new permission scheme. Permissions dot allow any. I do need to import this. It's not something I have access to. So that's coming from REST framework. Dot, is it permissions? Yep, there it is. Import permissions. All right, so again, these are the default Csrf permissioning scheme. So it handles the kind of legwork for us. Here, I'm saying I want to allow anyone to do a post request, meaning anyone should be allowed to create a new user. One important syntactical thing, I know we covered this probably like in week 1. This is a tuple. For tuples, if you have one item, you must put a comma at the very end. Otherwise, it's going to interpret this as just simply empty, like, parentheses, and treat this as a single item, not an item in a collection. Alternative to this, you could return a list, and a list can have one item with the syntax, but I prefer tuples in this case. So I'm gonna put a tuple, but to specify it's a one item tuple, I need this comma at the end. All right, that's a little extra for you guys if you guys forgot. All right, so I'm saying if they're posting, we want to allow anyone to post. But now I'm going to think about, well, what if, who should have access to our users, right? Let's say I'm a normal user of my site. Should I have the capability to delete other user accounts as a normal user? I'm thinking, no, that doesn't make sense. I should not have the power to delete other user accounts just as a normal user. So I'm going to return another permissioning scheme here. I'm going to say return permissions is admin. I think I might have a typo, but is admin user. This is going to say only admin users should have the right to delete or even update users. Now, I might want to change that later on, like if we need to update a password, sure. But I'm saying if it's not a post, so if it's a read, what is it? Read. Let's just say if it's a get, put, update, get, put, patch, or delete, only admin users can have access to that level of detail. Again, we can change this a little bit based on our needs, but I'm not gonna waste too much time on it. Just kind of accept anyone can sign up. Otherwise, no one else can have access to the data in the user model or the CRUD operations from the user model. Again, I think I have a typo on the page. It should be is admin user, not is admin. My apologies for that. Well, actually, but we'll have to figure this out. It's one of these. Okay, I need my comma at the end. All right, so that's should handle our three cases. When they're signing up, they hit our user view set. When they log in and log out, they hit our standalone methods. I feel like I've been talking for a while here, so let me pause here. Everyone kind of clear on what we've done on the back end here. Just as a quick review, again, if any questions, let me know. We are using the built-in user model, associating that with our task list as a foreign key, meaning whoever creates our task list will get their user ID associated with it. So they kind of own that task list. Serializers, nothing too exciting going here. Only maybe exciting thing is we are hashing the password automatically. We're not having the front end do it or doing it anywhere else. Passwords read only, nothing too exciting there. I think there's one more thing that I skipped over that I do want to do here. And I'm just going to kind of slide it in if you guys are fine with it. Where did I go? Oh, yes, we need to add the creator field right here. That's a new field in our task list. And then I think there was one more thing I needed to do. What was that? All right, so this is a design choice, and I don't want to make this too complicated. But I'm going to say my backend is going to be responsible for assigning the user. The front end is not going to send who created it. The backend will kind of deduce who created it. And that I have reasons for that, but I don't want to waste too much time talking about it. But it's slightly safer for the backend to do it rather than the front end sending some bogus user ID. So to do that, I'm going to hijack another method here. What is it? I'm going to need to look this one up. Serializers. Perform create, I think, is the method. Okay, so there's this method called perform create, which basically gets called before the creation happens. Again, I'm kind of glazing over a lot of details here, I know, but what I'm basically doing is I need to modify the data before it actually gets saved. So I'm gonna do something like this. Right here. So I guess, sorry, not before it gets created, but after it gets created, we want to do something extra. So here I want to set the creator ID, creator ID to be self.request.user. So when we create a new task list, the front end is just going to send like the name and description. The ID is going to be set right here based on who's logged in right now. We'll get the creator ID associated with it. Sorry, not ID, but the object, which will be an ID in the database. So again, this is our backend stamping on the current logged in user gets ownership of the task list, rather than the front end specifying who actually owns it. Let me pause here. Any questions about anything we did in the backend here? I know we did a lot. A lot of it was settings, and then we had to update our models and serialize a little bit to incorporate the new user concept. And then our views added login, logout, and sign up capabilities. And our URLs obviously had to reflect that. Any questions out there? Andrew Tran.
I think you just went over it. I got a little confused. When you create a task list, originally the value of the creator is no or empty. It's only when the task list is created that the thing that you just did happens where it assigns it.
Correct. Yeah, I said default is none. So if we didn't specify, we'd get away with it, but then no one would own those task lists. Like actually, if I go to my admin panel, if this is my server still up, users, all right, if I go to task lists, these task lists that we had before are not associated with anyone. So let's actually assign them to, let's go with Friday user. So let's say it's Friday. Friday user. Which one that updates? Save. Okay, so now we have a user for all our pre-existing ones. We did that manually, but any new list should always get a creator ID stamped automatically. We should never get a null value. This was just done for transition sake. All right, so that's our backend. We should have everything done on our backend. And let's actually move on to our front end now. Luckily, there are fewer changes we need to do on the front end. There's one key change for the separate project setup. We need to make one key change for our API calls. So I'm going to go to my front end and go to, and this is where I kind of created a new file, but it's exactly the same code we had yesterday. I created a file called API helpers. This has our good old friend try catch fetch. Again, I didn't change anything about the logic here. This previously was in our to-do API.js. I just moved it out to a helper file. But in here, we're going to add another helper method. And again, this is required if we have a separate React and Django project running together. So for that, I'm going to drop in some code. Most of this, again, is review. We cover this on Friday, but we're going to do it a slightly different way. And this is the easier way to do it. So we need to extract the Csrf token from our cookies. Again, we did this manually on Friday. I remember Raphael had a code snippet on Friday's curriculum page of how we actually go through all the cookies, look for a specific header or cookie name, and then we extract the value of it. This is a function, or this is actually a library that will get that cookie for us kind of an easier way. We just tell it what cookie we want and give us the value back. To use this though, I need to install a library called JS cookie. So that's going to be a quick installation. Let's go to our front end. Again, you do not have to use this. There's a, you can find a code snippet to do this manually, but I'm going to do it the easier way. So CD into front end. I'm going to do an npm install JS cookie. This is a library that someone's written to make cookie extraction much easier. So again, the short of it is it's going to find the Csrf token cookie in our browser and give us the value back. So we need to set a header with X Csrf token. Now, if I can kind of go back to Friday's page just to compare and contrast. Let's go to curriculum with week 10. Pretty sure we had a nice function here. Yeah, so this was the function to find the cookie. This is what the JS cookie library is doing for us. Additionally, I remember that Raphael had us set the default Axios call to use the same token every time. Now this was beneficial. So we didn't have to specify the header every single time we made an API call with Axios. We set it one time and always use the same value. Now, the slight downside is, I know I was working with a student, I believe it's Kat, if you can speak to it maybe. Kat was using a third-party API where we also had to use Axios to make that call. It turned out that this Csrf token was actually conflicting with something with that API, that she was getting denied access to that API because we had set the Csrf token for every single Axios call. So that's something to keep in mind, that you can run into some issues if you use defaults for every single Axios call. In this case, I believe it's Kat, but whatever student was using it, was making a third-party API call with Axios and also an API call to their own backend. In that case, we only want the Csrf token for our backend calls, not every single Axios call. So with that in mind, I am setting the header individually for every API call that I make, and that's just going to make it more flexible for me. All right, so one thing we need to set here is the headers. Again, same thing we did before, just doing a little more explicitly here for each call. The other thing we need to add is with credentials. Again, this is something, it took me a while to figure out, configuration issues, but you need to set with credentials to true in your Axios header or in your Axios config section. So again, you can copy and paste this from the curriculum page, should be good to go. Remember, you need to install JS cookie to kind of use this code. But with this in place, this is a helper method. If I go to my to-do API, every single API call now, this is not correct. Every single API call should have the config set in it. So Axios takes in a URL, optionally might take in some data depending on the method, but the third parameter for post will be API config or API helper dot get CSRF config. So you're gonna have to read documentation to understand kind of where this goes. For post, it's the third parameter. For gets, it's actually the second parameter. So every single Axios call I make to my backend, if I need the CSRF token, I need to send the config header here. So I'm gonna modify all my API calls to make sure I'm setting that. So we had get task by ID, task list, deletes. All right. So now that I'm setting this header, Django knows that we're authenticated because we are passing the token back to Django. All right, so this is, again, additional step that you need to do if you have a separate React and Django project. If you go with the hybrid solution, you get to avoid this step. I think it works right out of the box because Django knows what origin it's coming from. All right, so that's the only change we need to make to get our API calls to work. I also need one up here. Andrew, question, comment?
Just to make sure, like what you just said. So we have it separated like this. We have to do something to add additionally for both Csrf and cores.
Yes,
But like if we combine them, we don't have to do either, is what you're saying.
correct. So, yep.
I
there might
actually
be
think
some-
the project you helped me with, Ankur, that was one where it was combined. So I think you might need this part either way. I don't know, whatever. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, okay, so keep that in mind. So maybe you do need all this stuff. I've only tested it with the separate project setup. So I do know you get some benefits of using the hybrid setup, but I guess table that. My apologies if I misspoke there. But yeah, so we do need to send, we do need to send this token regardless. Sorry, let me be clear on that. We need to send this regardless. We did this last Friday. The token must be sent. This part only needs to be done for the disconnected case. Project setup. This always needs to be sent. So apologies again, we did do that last Friday where we found the token and sent it. So that did not change. Thank you for correcting me there. So yeah, this needs to be there. This part needs to be only for a separate project setup. Separate. Okay, so moving on from here. Yep.
Could you make a distinction between like separate as we have it now and hybrid again? Is it like the file structure or what?
Yeah, the file structure. So a separate project setup is your React project and your Django project are totally separate. You can run them separately. They can be deployed to different locations. For that, you need to go through all the steps we went through today. The specific things for that are setting with credentials here, with credentials right here. And if I go back to my settings, sorry for jumping around so much, go to my settings, my project. These two additional things must be done only for a separate project setup. So 1, 2, and 3 are specific to separate projects where React and Django are totally separated from one another. If you have the hybrid setup where you have Django serving up your React project, that is our hybrid solution, you can avoid some of these setup things, but you still need to pass the Csrf token and you still need login, logout functionality. All that stuff doesn't go away. Okay, so those are all the steps we need. I know that seemed like a lot, but it took longer because we had to kind of talk about the additional view set and serializer items we did. But more or less, it's pretty simple to set up. You just need to do some settings and make sure you're passing the token appropriately. With this in place, our front end should now be configured such that anonymous users are denied CRUD access. We need to set up like a login and sign up page. We'll do that probably after lunch. But once we have that in place, we should be able to make authenticated requests to our backend, and then we can use the authenticated user to determine what data we want to send to them. Luckily, it's not that complicated. I promise you, this was probably the most complex part of authentication. But with that said, we are approaching lunch, so I'm going to say we're going to continue this after lunch. It's not going to take, it will not take more than an hour. I want to say it's going to be a half an hour. We're just going to create a login page on the front end, make some UI changes so that we prevent showing any relevant data if they're not logged in. And the rest of it should be pretty straightforward, where we can CRUD if we're logged in, we should be denied if we're not logged in. That shouldn't be too much more than just UI development on the front end side. With that said, what questions do you guys have about what we went over so far?
Yeah, so earlier you said something about like how we want them to be authenticated to do everything except that if they're not authenticated, they can't even sign up. Could you quickly go over how we circumvented that again?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great thing to go over while we have a few minutes before lunch. So by default, again, let's back up one more step. By default, this is my choice for my settings. Where did they go? I told my project that everyone must be authenticated to any CRUDing with my models. So is authenticated is one of many options I could have chosen, but this says any CRUDing that happens with my view sets. So let's find my view sets again. Too many files open here. Anything that my view sets do, they're going to demand that the request is made by an authenticated user. So again, the self.request refers to the request object. They're going to check the user on it. So there's a user field on the request. They're going to make sure that that's an authenticated user, i.e. it's not anonymous. If my current setup was like that and I did not have this extra bit right here, so I'm going to take away for a second. By default, every CRUD operation, create, read, update, requires authentication. The way I kind of overrode that or made it more special for my user view set is that I overrode this function called get permissions. Again, this, just to make it clear, this is a method that exists in model view set. So, or it might be one of its inherited classes, but this method exists. So I did not choose this name arbitrarily. This is a specific method I'm overriding. I'm saying, hey, user, if you're sending us a post request, I'm going to allow anyone to do it by kind of changing the permissioning scheme. So the default permissioning scheme for these view sets is authenticated. Because I'm not specified it, it's going to take the default. Here, I'm overriding default and saying, for this particular case, our permissioning scheme is going to be allow any. So anyone can do a sign up. Additionally, I chose, I don't want to expose user CRUDing to just anyone out there. So I'm going to say only admin users can have the ability to delete or update, or what else? Or read users. Like if I want to see a list of every user that exists in our system from the front end, only admin users should have that power. No normal user should be able to see who else exists on my site. So there's just design choices I chose for the permissioning scheme, but this is how you can kind of more granularly provide permissioning schemes based on CRUD access. So again, post, if I wanted to do, special one for delete, I can do that as granular or non-granular as I want to.
So the user view set is basically for all the CRUD operations for the user model, and then we're
Right.
just saying with that function that if they're posting, in which case the only post thing that we are letting them do is creating a new user, then anyone can do that.
Right. Again, this is not even a decision we made. This is something, I think I have my notes somewhere. Sorry, I kind of scattered with multiple projects here. But yeah, again, that's like the default behavior, right? A post is automatically converted to a create. There's no other post that they could send to like update, right? That is not what the DRF scheme is. So post is always going to mean create. So yeah, in this case, we know if it's a post, they're just trying to create a new user. But yeah, good question. I'm glad you asked that because that was worth going over. Edgar?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, is this code gonna be in the demos and notes for during lunch?
Sorry,
lunch?
your audio started like lagging mightily. I heard, is it going to be available for? I will upload it if that's the question. If that was not the question, just type it in the chat and I'll try to answer it. Shun?
Yeah, so just to so I can understand. So in this model right now, the user can't change their password, right? Because they only have post, right? Only an admin user can, right?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. If we want to expose that feature, we would need to maybe add, so in that case, just to go off of Sean's question, we can't let anonymous users change their password because we don't know who they are. But we could add another case of, self.request.method. Let's say if they're trying to do a patch, let's assume patch is updating their password, return permission is authenticated. Yep, so if they're patching, authenticated users can do that. If they're creating, anyone can do that. If they're trying to delete or get users, only admin users can do it. So again, as granular or non-granular as we want it. Any other questions out there? Yilin?
Yes, do you mind quickly go over the inheritance part where you use .super method real quick? Because I kind of got fuzzy on it.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think I know we're a little past noon, but hopefully you guys can stick with me for a couple more minutes. Worth going over. So we used super method in a couple of places. I think I screwed up here. So let's actually add it here. So what super does is it's going to basically call our base class method. So super is going to look, when I call super, it's going to say, all right, model serializer, do you have a method called perform create? If it does, it's going to call it. If it doesn't exist, I'm not quite sure what will happen, but it's going to find it because I know this method exists in the base class. This is from reading documentation. Again, that's half the battle. I know it's frustrating, but I went to the Django Rest framework documentation. They said, hey, there's a method called perform create that the base code has. And then you can override it if you need to. Again, you can override any method that exists in the base class if you want to add on or kind of intercept what they're doing to do whatever you want. So in this case, I actually forgot to add the super here. So here I want to basically save the creator, and then I'm going to call perform create. Pretty sure this is required. Create serializer. I'm actually not sure if this is required because there might not be anything in the base perform create. Let's actually try to find that. But the idea here is the base class has the method. We want to make sure the base class has a chance to do what it wants to do, because I don't know what it's quite doing, right? I'm not writing the code for the base code. I'm just adding my extra code and relying on the base code to do what it normally would by calling super, which is going to say, hey, base class, do what you need to do for this method. So I'm calling another function here. If I didn't have the super method, here, this is going to be basically calling the same method on this level. This is going to be an infinite loop. So I'm saying perform create, call perform create. The default behavior of Python is going to be look in the current level for this function before moving into the base class. The super says specifically start in the base class, don't look on this level. Again, super will automatically know what the base class is. Okay, cool. Got a thumbs up from Yilin. Shun, you have your hand raised. Was that a follow-up question or? All right, Shun disappeared. All right, any other questions before we break for lunch here? Just to highlight again, you should always call your base class unless you explicitly know you do not want the base class to do what it's doing. So rule of thumb, if you're overriding a function, make sure you call the base class unless you know for sure you don't want to call the base class. All right, so here I'm intercepting the password, I'm hashing it, and then letting the base class do what it does for creating this object.
Hey, Ankur, not to like belabor this too much, but what you just did, the perform create, would you need to do that if you had created your user from the beginning and tied your task list to a user from the beginning?
No.
Like with an ID? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so no. So that, again, this is design choice. Just to kind of walk through my design choices. I'm not saying they're the best design choices, but I decided when a user logs in, I just pass the front end the username. I could pass back the user ID also, and then the front end could assign that user ID to any task list that it creates, right? Because if you're logged in, if you have the ID, when you're creating the task list, you just specify the creator value. For my perspective, you guys want my 2 cents, I'm going to say that's a little more dangerous, because what if someone has access like through Postman to kind of create any task list, assign it to any user? That's a little too much power potentially. So this way, the server explicitly knows who's logged in and will only create task lists for that user. if I let the front end specify the user ID, it could, be malicious or accidentally set the wrong ID. Who knows what could happen. So that's a design choice. Neither are wrong. It's just what you think is best for your design.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That helps.
Cool. Thanks for your questions, everyone. All right. So I don't want to eat away too much at your lunch. As I said, there's a little more to do. I promise it's not going to be more than an hour. But we need to add some UI features to log in, sign up, and also block data access for non-logged in users. So we'll see how that works after lunch. Let me stop the recording.